How important is it to diversify? Because you each are, multi hyphenates. You do many things. Is it has that been an important part of your success? Versus focusing on a singular talent. M- uh, Moby, just being just diversifying what you do.
Um, I was actually sort of having this conversation with someone recently. A friend of mine had just started dating a drummer. That's the punchline. and and I got paternal. I was concerned because they're like thinking of getting married and having kids, and I was like, drumming is great. When you're not drumming, you're broke. And one of the I can't sing very well, and I'm not a very good dancer, and I'm not very attractive, and that forced me to learn how to produce and DJ, basically do all the things that musicians do when they're not attractive, can't sing well, and can't dance. And but there was the benefit of that is like there was a time when I was in a lawsuit with a record company, so I couldn't make my own records. So I produced other people and did remixing and did DJing. And so it's very practical. If you're a musician in 2011, you do, for better or worse, need to know how to do a lot of different things. And simply, well, in order to pay the rent, in order to potentially put your kids through school, but also to better understand. Like, one of the nice things about DJing is it gives you a very utilitarian understanding of how music exists in the real world. Because we all know, like, a musician in a recording studio at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can make a piece of music and think like, this is great, people are going to love it, and it goes out into the world and falls flat. Whereas DJing, performing, remixing, producing other people, it gives you insights into the way other people approach the creative process. And as I said, also how music does exist in a very practical way in people's lives. Because musicians are by definition self-involved. And we assume that because we've made something, people should pay attention to it. That, thank God, is not the way the world works. People pay attention to something because it occupies an important space in their lives. And by doing a lot of different things, it reminds me of that. So in a very practical way, I'm grateful for the fact that I'm not attractive, I can't sing very well, and I can't dance.
So, being diversified is good for a lot of reasons. Raphael, with that in mind, though, what do you think is your strongest creative asset that you consider, in yourself? Uh, I'm really, really good at that.
Well, well, for me, I think I'm really good at what I'm doing at the time. I mean,
All right.
yeah, I feel like if I'm touring, I'm gonna be in front of a crowd of people that's gonna be looking at me, and I don't want to be embarrassed. That's my whole thing about doing a show. It has to be good, because I've been places and listened to people on the way out the door talking about the band, and then I've also, producing. For me, when I make records, my whole producing thing has been like my mom said, you don't want to make people happy twice. To hear you, then be glad when you stop. So I try to make my records so you like them enough to stand them until they go off. So with producing, I felt like I'm good at it when I produce because I'm in a room with people. I think producing is the hardest thing to do because you're producing for someone else and they could just turn and look at you and go, I didn't like any of that. Or, I don't like that. And so to me, producing is the best practice, like Moby said, like, being a DJ. I grew up with a lot of DJs and you hear so much different music. And I think it's always best to be able, I always use basketball or sports analogies to say if you're on the court, you should be able to shoot from anywhere on the court. So for me, coming from like R&B in the beginning to most people, when I got into business, that's what they know me as. But I grew up in the Bay Area where, like I grew up right by the Oakland Coliseum. So the Grateful Dead would play there. Then it would be the Ohio players and all the Deadheads would be in my neighborhood for 2 weeks after the Dead was there. So I would,
Still there.
yeah. And so in between that and Parliament Funkadelic and all this music, the Mamas and the Papas, I had all this music in my head, like Carlos Santana had all this music in my head. So I had so many different teachers and so many different people and played for so many bands. I could look at a different singer and maybe know what they might want to do before they know it. So I would say it's best to be, diverse in everything you do in the music industry, because if you're on a label, like he said, and I've had problems with labels too, that when they, when earlier on when I was a little more stubborn, and I used to ask a lot of questions as a younger artist, and like about publishing, and I used to ask this president one time. I said, how does a company take publishing 100% from a kid? And the guy looked at me like, didn't answer the question, So I was, at that point, I was like the knucklehead. I was the bad kid. So for me, if I was having a problem on that side of the spectrum, then I would go produce somebody else. Then they would have to look at me because I'm producing this artist that's pretty big. So they didn't want to, ignore me completely. So it was best that I know how to produce. And then singing became sort of secondary. And, you got to be able to do everything so people cannot really ignore you in this business that we're in. You got to be able to do everything. You go to a show, somebody, I believe my last record was not completely ignored because I went to France, and Colombia and France really loved it. I think they called back to America and said, hey, this dude is the real deal. And then I think everything started brewing up from there. So you have to be a drummer, a guitar player, a DJ. You have to know what DJs like. You have to like rock bands. You can't just not like R&B. You have to be all over the place. You can't be in one spot. It'll never work. You'll be back at the day job in like a year and a half.